Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other girls in her small Texas town. While they spent their afternoons at the mall or gossiping about boys, she could be found in her grandfather's workshop, carefully cleaning an old hunting rifle that had belonged to 3 generations of her family. The weapon was nothing fancy, just a reliable bolt-action rifle with a worn wooden stock that bore the scratches and dents of countless hunting trips. Her fascination with precision shooting began when she was 12 years old. Her grandfather, Miguel, a retired military veteran, noticed her steady hands and exceptional eyesight during a family camping trip. While her cousins struggled to hit tin cans at 50 yards, Sarah consistently placed shots within inches of her target. Miguel recognized something special in his granddaughter and began teaching her the fundamentals of marksmanship. The lessons started simple. Miguel taught her about breathing control, explaining how the rise and fall of her chest could throw off a shot by several inches at long distances. He showed her how to find her natural point of aim, how to squeeze the trigger straight back without disturbing the rifle's alignment, and most importantly, how to read the wind. These were skills that took most shooters years to master, but Sarah absorbed them like a sponge soaking up water. By the time she turned 16, Sarah could consistently hit targets at distances that amazed even experienced hunters in their community. She could read wind patterns by watching grass sway or leaves flutter, calculating in her head how many clicks of adjustment her scope needed to compensate for crosswinds at different distances. Her mathematical mind, which earned her top grades in school, naturally adapted to the complex calculations required for long-range precision shooting. However, her passion came with a price. In a town where traditional gender roles still held strong influence, Sarah's interest in firearms raised eyebrows. Her female classmates couldn't understand why she would rather spend Saturday mornings at the shooting range than shopping or attending social events. The boys, initially intrigued by a girl who could outshoot most of them, gradually became resentful as Sarah's skills surpassed their own. The mockery started subtly. Snide comments about girls trying to act tough, whispered jokes about Sarah compensating for something, and eye rolls whenever she mentioned her weekend shooting practice. Her high school peers began calling her names like Annie Oakley in a mocking tone, not understanding that she actually took it as a compliment. The situation worsened when Sarah joined the school's newly formed competitive shooting team. During her first team practice, the coach had to address the elephant in the room. Several male team members had complained about having a girl on the squad, arguing that she would be a liability during competitions. They believed that under pressure she would crack and cost them valuable points. The coach, a fair-minded man named Robert Chen, decided to let Sarah's performance speak for itself. The practice session took place at the local shooting range, with targets set at various distances from 100 to 800 meters. Sarah watched as her male teammates shot their groups, most managing to keep their shots within a 6-inch circle at the longer distances. When her turn came, the snickering was barely concealed. One teammate muttered loud enough for everyone to hear that they should probably move to a closer target for the girl. Sarah ignored the comments and focused on her breathing. She settled into her shooting position, adjusted her scope for the 800-meter target, and fired 5 careful shots. When they pulled the target, the group measured just over 2 inches, significantly tighter than any other shooter had managed that day. The range fell silent except for the sound of wind through the nearby trees. Coach Chen nodded approvingly and made a note on his clipboard, but Sarah could feel the hostile stares from her teammates. She had proven her skill, but instead of earning respect, she had apparently made enemies. After practice, she overheard one of the boys telling another that she had probably just gotten lucky, and that real competition would expose her as a fraud. Walking to her grandfather's old pickup truck, Sarah felt the familiar sting of isolation that had become her constant companion. She loved shooting more than anything else in the world, but she was beginning to wonder if pursuing her passion was worth the constant battle against those who believed girls had no place behind a rifle scope. Little did she know that her greatest challenge and her ultimate vindication still lay ahead. The state championship qualifying match arrived 3 months later, and Sarah had spent every available moment preparing. Her grandfather had driven her to ranges across 3 counties, helping her practice on different terrains and in various weather conditions. They would arrive before sunrise and stay until the range officers locked the gates, working on shots from 200 meters all the way out to 200 meters, when they could find a facility that accommodated such distances. Miguel had also shared stories from his military service, tales of snipers who could make impossible shots under extreme pressure. He taught Sarah breathing techniques used by special forces, methods for controlling her heart rate during stressful situations, and mental exercises for maintaining focus when everyone around her expected failure. These lessons proved invaluable as the competition approached. The qualifying match drew competitors from 43 high schools across the state. Sarah was one of only 4 female participants in a field of over 200 shooters. The format was grueling. Multiple stages of fire at distances ranging from 300 to 1,000 meters, with different shooting positions and time limits that tested both accuracy and speed. Only the top 20 shooters would advance to the state finals. On the morning of the competition, Sarah arrived at the range to find her teammates huddled together, pointedly excluding her from their pre-match strategy discussion. The message was clear. They considered her a liability and planned to distance themselves from any potential embarrassment she might cause. Other teams had also taken notice of the lone girl competitor, with several coaches making snide remarks within earshot about participation trophies and lowered standards. The first stage required shooters to engage targets at 300, 500, and 700 meters from a prone position within 30 minutes. Sarah watched as competitor after competitor struggled with the windy conditions, their shots scattered across the target face. When her relay was called, she approached the firing line with her grandfather's old rifle, its worn appearance contrasting sharply with the expensive precision firearms carried by most other competitors. As Sarah settled into position, she heard scattered laughter from the spectators. Someone made a comment about bringing a museum piece to a serious competition, while another voice wondered aloud if the girl even knew which end of the rifle the bullets came out of. Sarah used their mockery as fuel, channeling her anger into focus as she had learned to do during months of practice. The first target at 300 meters fell easily, her shots clustering in the 10 ring with mechanical precision. At 500 meters, she adjusted for the quartering headwind and continued her steady rhythm. The laughter had died down, replaced by curious murmurs as observers noticed the tight groups appearing on her targets. By the time she engaged the 700-meter target, a small crowd had gathered behind her shooting position to watch. Sarah's final shot at 700 meters struck dead center, completing a perfect score for the stage. As she stood and cleared her rifle, the silence from her teammates was deafening. She had not only outshot everyone in her relay, but had recorded one of the highest scores of the entire first stage. The expensive rifles and fancy gear of her competitors had been bested by an old hunting rifle and years of dedicated practice. The second stage proved even more challenging. Shooters had to engage targets at 800 and 1,000 meters from a supported standing position, simulating field conditions where a stable prone position might not be available. The time limit was reduced to 20 minutes and the wind had picked up significantly, adding another layer of difficulty to an already demanding test. Most competitors struggled with the standing position, their natural body sway making precise shots extremely difficult at such long ranges. Sarah, however, had practiced this exact scenario countless times with her grandfather. She had learned to use her shooting sling as a stabilizing aid and had developed techniques for timing her shots between heartbeats to minimize movement. Her performance at 1,000 meters silenced even her harshest critics. Shot after shot found the center of the target with consistency that bordered on the mechanical. Other competitors began gathering around her lane, studying her technique and trying to understand how someone with such basic equipment could achieve such extraordinary results. Sarah ignored the attention and focused solely on her shooting fundamentals. When the scores were posted after the second stage, Sarah found herself in third place overall, ahead of competitors from schools with million-dollar shooting programs and coaches with Olympic credentials. Her teammates, who had been preparing excuses for their association with her expected failure, suddenly found themselves scrambling to claim credit for her success. The final stage would separate the contenders from the pretenders, and Sarah knew that her real test was just beginning. The announcement of the final stage sent a ripple of excitement and anxiety through the remaining competitors. Range officials revealed that they would be shooting at an unprecedented distance of 1,500 meters, nearly a mile away. This was beyond the experience of most high school competitors, who rarely practiced beyond 1,200 meters. The target would be a standard precision rifle target, but at that distance, it would appear no larger than a postage stamp to the naked eye. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she heard murmurs from other competitors expressing doubt about the extreme distance. Several shooters openly questioned whether their equipment was even capable of accurate shots at such range. The wind had continued to build throughout the day, and meteorological conditions were becoming increasingly challenging. Crosswinds were gusting up to 15 miles per hour with unpredictable direction changes. Her grandfather appeared beside her, having been watching from the spectator area throughout the competition. Miguel could see the concern in his granddaughter's eyes and placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. He reminded her of their practice sessions at his friend's ranch, where they had access to a natural valley that allowed shots out to 1,600 meters. Sarah had successfully engaged targets at that distance before, though never under competitive pressure with hundreds of people watching. The format for the final stage was brutal in its simplicity. Each shooter would have 3 shots at the 1,500-meter target, fired from a prone position with no time limit. However, there was a catch that made the challenge even more daunting. Shooters would be called to the line individually, meaning each competitor would face the pressure of performing alone, while everyone else watched their every move. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah watched competitor after competitor struggle with the extreme distance. The first shooter, a senior from a prestigious military academy, managed to get only 1 shot on the target paper, with his other 2 rounds disappearing into the dirt berm somewhere short of the target. The second competitor, using a rifle that cost more than most people's cars, failed to hit the target at all, his shots scattered by the gusting wind. By the time the 10th shooter had attempted the stage, only 3 had managed to score any hits at all, and none had achieved what could be considered a respectable group size. The extreme distance was revealing the limits of both equipment and skill, separating those who had merely memorized shooting techniques from those who truly understood the complex physics of long-range marksmanship. Sarah's name was finally called, and she walked to the firing line carrying her grandfather's old rifle with steady hands, despite the butterflies in her stomach. She could hear whispered conversations from the crowd behind her, spectators wondering if the girl who had surprised everyone earlier could continue her remarkable performance at such an extreme distance. Her own teammates watched with a mixture of hope and skepticism, unsure whether to expect triumph or disaster. Setting up her shooting position, Sarah took extra time to study the environmental conditions. She watched grass movement at various distances, observed dust patterns kicked up by the wind, and noted the mirage patterns visible through her scope. These were subtle indicators that most shooters overlooked, but they provided crucial information about wind speed and direction at different points along the bullet's path. Her calculations were complex. At 1,500 meters, her bullet would take nearly 2 seconds to reach the target, time enough for wind conditions to change significantly during flight. She needed to account not just for the wind at her position, but also for conditions at the target and at several points in between. The bullet would also drop over 40 feet during its flight, requiring precise elevation adjustments to compensate for gravity's effect. Sarah's first shot felt good as it broke, the rifle recoiling smoothly against her shoulder. Through her scope, she could see a small puff of dust kick up behind the target, indicating a hit in the lower portion of the scoring rings. It wasn't perfect, but it was on target, which was more than most competitors had managed. She made a mental note of the slight wind shift she had detected just before firing and adjusted her hold accordingly. Her second shot produced another hit, this one higher and closer to the center of the target. The crowd behind her had grown noticeably quieter as they realized they were witnessing something special. Even experienced shooters and coaches were impressed by the consistency she was showing at such an extreme distance with equipment that most would consider inadequate for the task. For her final shot, Sarah took extra time to read the conditions. The wind had momentarily calmed, and she recognized an opportunity for a perfect shot. Her breathing slowed to an almost meditative rhythm as she settled the crosshairs on the target center. The trigger broke cleanly, and she knew immediately that the shot was perfect. The target was too distant to see impact with the naked eye, but the electronic scoring system confirmed what Sarah already knew. Her third shot had found the center ring, completing a group that would have been respectable at half the distance. The silence from the crowd was complete, broken only by the sound of wind through the nearby trees. As Sarah stood and cleared her rifle, she could see the shock on the faces of competitors and spectators alike. She had not only succeeded where others had failed, but had done so with apparent ease using equipment that most had dismissed as inadequate. Her performance had challenged every assumption about what was possible for a high school shooter, especially a female one. The remaining competitors faced an impossible standard after witnessing Sarah's performance. Several shooters who had been supremely confident earlier in the day now approached the firing line with visible nervousness, knowing that they needed to match or exceed what the girl with the old rifle had just accomplished. The psychological pressure was immense, and it showed in their results. One by one, experienced shooters with top-tier equipment failed to replicate Sarah's success. A shooter from the defending state champion school managed only one hit on the target paper, while his teammates failed to connect entirely. The pressure of trying to outperform Sarah's group had clearly affected their mental game, causing rushed shots and poor wind reading that resulted in missed targets and wild shots. When the final scores were tabulated, Sarah found herself not just among the qualifiers, but sitting in first place overall with a commanding lead. Her consistency across all three stages had set her apart from competitors who had excelled in one area but struggled in others. More importantly, her performance at the extreme 1,500-meter distance had been simply dominant, outscoring the second-place finisher by a margin that would have been impressive even at shorter distances. The award ceremony that evening was unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. As her name was announced as the overall winner, the applause was thunderous but mixed with an undercurrent of disbelief. Many spectators were still processing what they had witnessed, struggling to reconcile their preconceptions about female shooters with the undeniable evidence of Sarah's superior performance. Her teammates, who had spent months treating her as an outsider and liability, suddenly crowded around her for photos, eager to associate themselves with her success. Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness as she realized that their acceptance was conditional on her proving herself in the most public way possible. She had earned their respect, but it had come at the cost of months of isolation and self-doubt. The media attention was immediate and intense. Local newspapers ran front-page stories about the small-town girl who had dominated the state's best shooters, while regional television stations sent reporters to interview the unlikely champion. Sarah handled the attention with the same composure she had shown on the firing line, deflecting credit to her grandfather's patient instruction while expressing quiet confidence in her abilities. However, not all the attention was positive. Online forums dedicated to competitive shooting buzzed with controversy about Sarah's victory. Some commenters questioned whether the competition had been legitimate, suggesting that special accommodations had been made for a female competitor. Others speculated about whether her equipment had been illegally modified or whether she had received unfair coaching assistance during the competition. The most hurtful comments came from those who seemed unable to accept that a teenage girl could outshoot experienced male competitors using basic equipment. These critics developed elaborate theories about everything from rigged targets to specially loaded ammunition, all designed to explain away what they saw as an impossible result. Sarah tried to ignore the online negativity, but the constant questioning of her achievement was wearing. Miguel watched his granddaughter struggle with the aftermath of her success and recognized the signs of someone questioning whether their accomplishments were worth the battles they had to fight. He had seen similar reactions in military units where female soldiers had to constantly prove themselves in ways their male counterparts never experienced. The victory should have been purely joyful, but it was complicated by those who couldn't accept the evidence of their own eyes. The state finals were still 6 weeks away, and Sarah knew that her qualifying performance had painted a target on her back. Every shooter who would compete at state would know about the girl who had dominated the qualifying round, and they would be studying her technique and preparing specifically to beat her. The pressure would be unlike anything she had experienced before. More concerning were the rumors that had begun circulating about the state finals format. Word was spreading that officials were considering adding an even longer distance stage, possibly out to 2,000 meters or beyond, specifically to challenge the competitors who had shown exceptional long-range ability. While this wasn't officially announced, the possibility added another layer of uncertainty to her preparation. Sarah began training with renewed intensity, pushing herself to even greater distances when possible, and working on mental conditioning exercises to handle the pressure she knew would be waiting for her at state. Her grandfather arranged access to a private range owned by a retired Marine Corps sniper instructor, who was curious to meet the young woman whose performance had become legendary in precision shooting circles. The Marine, a grizzled veteran named Frank Rodriguez, initially approached the training session with skepticism. He had heard the stories but assumed they had been exaggerated through retelling. However, after watching Sarah shoot for just 30 minutes, he understood that the reports had not been embellished. If anything, they had understated her natural ability and technical proficiency. Rodriguez agreed to work with Sarah on advanced techniques used by military snipers, methods that went far beyond what was typically taught to civilian competitors. These included reading atmospheric conditions at extreme distances, calculating for the Coriolis effect that could influence bullets at ranges beyond 1,000 meters, and mental exercises for maintaining focus during extended shooting sessions. As the state finals approached, Sarah felt more prepared than ever, but she also understood that her greatest challenge would not be technical. The real test would be performing under the unprecedented pressure of being the favorite, while knowing that hundreds of people would be watching specifically to see if she could repeat her earlier success, or if it had been a fluke. The victory ceremony was emotional for Sarah in ways she hadn't expected. As she stood on the top step of the podium, holding her state championship trophy, she looked out at an audience that had been transformed by what they had witnessed. The same people who had arrived skeptical of a teenage girl's ability to compete with seasoned shooters were now giving her a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Her teammates, coaches, and even competitors who had initially dismissed her were now crowding around to offer congratulations and take photos with the new state champion. The transformation was remarkable but bittersweet, as Sarah realized that she had needed to prove herself beyond any reasonable doubt before earning the respect that should have been given freely. She had not just won a shooting competition. She had challenged fundamental assumptions about what girls could accomplish. The media attention following her state championship victory was intense and overwhelming. National shooting magazines featured her on their covers. Television stations across the country ran features about the small-town girl who had rewritten the record books, and social media buzzed with videos of her remarkable long-distance shots. Sarah found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never sought, becoming an unwitting symbol for girls who wanted to participate in traditionally male-dominated sports. College recruiters came calling with scholarship offers from some of the most prestigious shooting programs in the country. Universities that had never seriously considered offering full scholarships to female shooters suddenly recognized the marketing and competitive value of having Sarah on their teams. She had proven that gender was irrelevant when it came to precision marksmanship, opening doors that had been closed to countless girls before her. However, the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Frank Rodriguez, the retired Marine sniper instructor who had helped with her training, informed Sarah that her performance had caught the attention of military special operations recruiters. Her natural ability, combined with her mental toughness and adaptability, made her an ideal candidate for advanced marksmanship programs that few people even knew existed. The offer was both flattering and daunting. Sarah would have the opportunity to train with the world's best military snipers, learning techniques and technologies that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in precision shooting. However, it would also mean committing to a path that would take her far from the quiet Texas town where her journey had begun, into a world where her skills would be put to life and death tests. Miguel watched his granddaughter wrestle with these life-changing decisions and offered the wisdom that had guided him through his own military career. He reminded her that talent carried with it a responsibility to use it wisely, whether that meant inspiring the next generation of female shooters, pursuing Olympic dreams, or serving her country in ways that only someone with her unique abilities could. Managed at the shooting range where Sarah had first learned to handle a rifle became a pilgrimage site for young female shooters from across the region. Girls who had never considered competitive shooting were inspired by her example, showing up with their fathers or grandfathers to learn the basics of marksmanship. The old boys club atmosphere that had once dominated the sport was slowly changing, as range owners and coaches recognized the untapped potential in female participants. Sarah made a decision that surprised many of her advisors. Rather than immediately accepting any of the college scholarships or military opportunities, She chose to spend a gap year traveling to shooting ranges and schools across the country, conducting clinics for young female shooters. She wanted to ensure that other girls wouldn't have to face the same skepticism and barriers that had marked her own journey to excellence. During these clinics, Sarah discovered that her experience was far from unique. Girls everywhere had been told that shooting sports weren't for them, that they lacked the physical strength or mental toughness required for precision marksmanship. Many had natural ability that matched or exceeded their male counterparts, but they had never been given the encouragement or opportunity to develop their skills. The impact of Sarah's tour was immediate and measurable. Participation rates among female shooters increased dramatically wherever she visited, and several state shooting associations revised their programs to be more welcoming and inclusive. Range owners reported significant increases in female membership, while equipment manufacturers began developing products specifically designed for female shooters. Sarah's story also resonated far beyond the shooting community. She became a symbol for anyone who had been underestimated because of their gender, age, or background. Speaking engagements at schools and youth organizations allowed her to share the broader message that excellence was available to anyone willing to work for it, regardless of what others might think about their chances of success. The girl who had once been mocked for carrying an old rifle had become a catalyst for change in one of America's most traditional sports. Her victory at 200 meters had been measured in inches on a distant target, but its impact was being felt across an entire generation of young people who learned that limitations were often imposed by others, not by their own actual capabilities. Years later, when shooting historians looked back at the transformation of competitive marksmanship from a male-dominated sport to one that welcomed participants of all backgrounds, they would point to a specific moment when everything changed. It was the day when a teenager named Sarah Martinez proved that skill. Dedication and mental toughness were more important than stereotypes, and that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the one who will redefine what's possible. The state finals venue was unlike anything Sarah had seen before. The competition was held at a former military training facility that had been converted into a world-class precision rifle range. The facility could accommodate shots out to 2,500 meters, with electronic scoring systems and climate-controlled firing positions that rivaled those used in Olympic competitions. The message was clear. This was the big leagues. Sarah arrived to find that her reputation had preceded her in ways both positive and negative. Reporters from shooting magazines wanted interviews, while college recruiters hoped to discuss scholarship opportunities. However, she also noticed the cold stares from competitors and coaches who viewed her previous success with suspicion and resentment. Several shooting teams had clearly spent time studying video footage of her technique, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. The format for the state finals was revealed during the technical meeting, and it was designed to push every aspect of marksmanship to its limits. 5 stages of fire would test competitors at distances from 600 meters out to an unprecedented 2,200 meters. The final stage would be shot in pairs, with competitors alternating shots while their partner spotted for them, adding a psychological element that would test nerves as much as skill. During the practice period, Sarah noticed that several competitors were using equipment that likely cost more than her family's car. Custom rifles built by famous gunsmiths, scopes with price tags in the 5-figure range, and ammunition loaded to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. She overheard one competitor joking that his rifle alone cost more than some people made in a year. The disparity in equipment was stark and intimidating, but Miguel reminded his granddaughter of an important truth. The most expensive rifle in the world was worthless without the skill to use it properly. He had seen wealthy hunters with equipment worth small fortunes who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, while skilled marksmen with basic rifles achieved remarkable accuracy through practice and understanding of fundamentals. The first 3 stages of competition went much as Sarah expected. Her consistent technique and superior wind-reading ability kept her near the top of the leaderboard, though several competitors with exceptional equipment managed to match her scores. By the end of the 3rd stage, Sarah was tied for 2nd place, just 1 point behind a shooter from California who was using a rifle that had won multiple national championships. The 4th stage would separate the contenders from the pretenders. Competitors would engage targets at 1,800 meters from a barricade position. simulating the kind of field conditions that military and law enforcement snipers might encounter. The shooting position was unstable, requiring competitors to find creative ways to support their rifles while managing the additional challenges of the extreme distance. Sarah watched the first few competitors struggle with the awkward position and swirling wind conditions. At the extended range, the barricade forced shooters to adopt uncomfortable positions that tested their ability to maintain precise rifle control while dealing with natural body tremor and muscle fatigue. Several experienced shooters managed only one hit out of 3 attempts, while others failed to connect with the target entirely. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the barricade with confidence born from countless hours of practice in various field positions. Her grandfather had taught her techniques for using improvised rifle rests, and she quickly identified the most stable shooting position available within the barricade constraints. Her first shot connected solidly with the target, followed by 2 more hits that grouped within inches of each other. Her performance at the barricade stage moved her into first place overall, but more importantly, it demonstrated that her success was not dependent on perfect conditions. She could adapt to challenging circumstances and maintain her accuracy, even when forced out of her comfort zone. The crowd of spectators and media representatives had grown throughout the day, word of the remarkable competition spreading beyond the shooting community. As evening approached, the final stage was announced with appropriate fanfare. Competitors would shoot in pairs at a distance of 200 meters, with each shooter taking 1 shot while their partner served as a spotter, then switching roles. The twist was that both shooters' scores would be combined, meaning that Sarah would need a partner who could match her level of performance. The pairing was done randomly, and Sarah found herself teamed with Marcus Chen, the son of her high school shooting coach and a competent shooter in his own right. However, Marcus had never attempted a shot beyond 1,500 meters, and the pressure of being paired with the tournament leader was clearly affecting his composure. Sarah realized that her own success would partially depend on her ability to help her partner perform at his best. The 2,200-meter distance was extreme by any standard. At that range, the bullet would be in flight for nearly 3 seconds, during which time environmental conditions could change significantly. The target appeared as little more than a dot even through high-powered scopes, and the slightest error in wind reading or range estimation would result in a complete miss. Sarah went first, settling into her prone position while Marcus provided spotting assistance. The wind was tricky, with different conditions visible at various points along the bullet's path. Sarah made her calculations based on years of experience reading environmental factors, adjusted her scope accordingly, and sent her shot downrange. Through the electronic scoring system, she could see that her bullet had impacted just outside the center ring, a remarkable shot at such extreme distance. Now it was Marcus's turn, with Sarah providing spotting guidance. She could see his nervousness as he settled behind his rifle, and she spoke quietly to him about wind conditions and range adjustments. Her calm coaching seemed to help, and Marcus fired his shot with good form. The bullet impacted the target not as precisely as Sarah's shot, but well within the scoring rings. As the final scores were calculated, Sarah realized that she had achieved something truly historic. Not only had she won the state championship by a commanding margin, but she had done so while shooting at distances that challenged even experienced adult competitors. Her victory was complete and undeniable, silencing the critics who had questioned her earlier success.